Afghanistan's former president speaks out. I catch up with Hamid Karzai, who tells me the US is willfully doing nothing to stop the spread of Daesh. I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is none other than the former Afghan leader. By now, US troops were meant to be out of Afghanistan, but the US is weighing up sending in thousands more. In the past few years, Afghans have seen a relatively stable security situation collapse, with frequent bombings ripping the country apart. The government faces a resurgent Taliban and the spread of Daesh, renewing the fears of what brought international troops to the country in the first place, that Afghanistan will be used as a base to attack the West, as it was on September 11, 2001. After 9/11, Hamid Karzai took charge of the country following the US-led invasion. The United States backed him, but now the former president is speaking out against them. I met up with Karzai here in Istanbul to ask if he's planning to make a political comeback. Hamid Karzai, welcome to Istanbul.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you on the
Thank
program
you.
again. Tell us why you're here.
I'm here to see some friends and family, and I'll be leaving back tonight.
Now, when we were looking at your schedule over the past few months, you would forgive us for thinking when we saw former president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, going to Russia, former president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, going to China, former president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, coming to Turkey, having meetings. It sounds like a man who's re-injecting himself into the political sphere and maybe who wants to become president of Afghanistan again.
No, I'm not in politics. I'm not re-injecting myself into the political sphere, and I don't want to become the president of Afghanistan again. I've done my time. I did what I could for my country, and I like the new generation of Afghans to come forward and take our country to peace and to the heights of progress and prosperity.
Millions of Afghans support you. If there was a large enough number of Afghans who wanted you to run for the sake of their country, you're a patriot, and said, we want President Karzai back, would you run?
Well, my wish is not to run. My wish is not to become the president of Afghanistan again. I can serve the country in lots of other ways. As a citizen, in many different ways. But if the Afghan people go and ask that questions, they have that right to ask that question and to seek who they want to have. But as far as I'm concerned, as a citizen of this country, as a one who has been already president for 14 years, 13 years, I wouldn't want it. The Afghan people, of course, are sovereign. They can have their sovereign rights.
But a substantial portion of the country still has majestic, immense respect for you. And they remember your time fondly. Is it naive to think that people are obviously still coming to you and asking you, what shall we do right now? What would you do differently? I'm
glad to know that. Of course, as a person, as an individual, we all want to be liked. And it makes me happy to see that some people like me, but that doesn't mean that I should become the president or that I should turn to the business of government in Afghanistan. Yes, as an Afghan national, as someone with experience in Afghanistan of all types, including 13 years of being in office as the president, the Afghan people would expect me to help when we have difficulties, when we have harder times. And it is also my job as a citizen of the country to do that, because it's our home. And that's where we live. That's where our children are. That's where we want to be. Therefore, every family and the family of Afghans want to be in a good home, in a good country. And that's what we are trying to achieve. And if I can do anything in this regard to further a happy life in Afghanistan, I will do it, and I'll be delighted and honored.
How are you helping right now?
I am working hard together with the rest of the Afghan people, by trying to reach our aspirations of peace, prosperity, a sovereign Afghanistan, where we don't depend on foreigners, where the American troops aren't there, where we don't need to be looking to outsiders for support, where we can make, create, and earn our own, where we can have a better life, a peaceful life, where we can be as peaceful as here, happily in Istanbul, as a nation, as a society, as a country. That's an aspiration, that's a human aspiration. And we need that as a people, we also deserve that as a people. And that's what I'm hoping to be useful towards.
You say a sovereign Afghanistan without American troops in Afghanistan. It appears as if General Mattis has been given the go-ahead by President Trump to develop a new Afghanistan strategy. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was just in Afghanistan. They seem to want another troop surge to take the American troops from about 8,400 to over 10,000. They want to inject a few more thousand American troops. It sounds reasonable, doesn't it? I mean, bombs are blowing up in Kabul, in Helmand, all over the place.
When the Americans came in after September 11, many, a great majority of the Afghan people welcomed them. And we joined hands with them. And that brought the immediate success that we had. And in certain areas, in the improvement of the economy, in the improvement of education, of all sorts of improvements in our life, the Americans, our neighbors, the rest of the world joined hands, and we were successful, and we are thankful for that. But the fundamental area, which was the reason for the US to come to Afghanistan after September 11, the fight against extremism and terrorism, and bringing security to Afghanistan, the American enterprise, the American action failed. Failed because, in our view, of the mistakes that they made. They ignored the sanctuaries outside of Afghanistan, beyond Afghanistan. They attacked Afghan villages. They attacked Afghan people. They created prisons in Afghanistan. They did all sorts of wrong in Afghanistan, which led to their failure. Today, Afghanistan is much less secure, much more in trouble in terms of lack of security than you could have ever imagined. And in the presence of the US forces in Afghanistan, extremism increased, violence increased. Even Daesh emerged under their wings, under the wings of the Americans in Afghanistan, of their presence in Afghanistan. So I don't believe that any increase in US troops in Afghanistan is going to help end violence. They were there, violence kept increasing. No, it is the US strategy that should change. It is the US thinking, if they are sincere in fighting extremism. I must underline this.
You think they're not sincere?
No, I don't think at all. If they are sincere in fighting extremism, if that's really the reason they have come to Afghanistan for, then they must change their strategy.
They bombed and killed more than 90 Daesh fighters in Nangarhar very recently. Doesn't that show sincerity?
That does not. That shows the opposite. They came to test their bomb. Why would they use on a cave that had no people in it, even if they killed 90 people? That doesn't give them the right to come and use the biggest of their nuclear bomb on Afghanistan. They call it the mother of all bombs. We don't like to call it the mother of all bombs. Mother is a very kind being. Mm-hmm. Mother gives life. It doesn't take life away. And the Americans call it, not the American people, the American government. So let's call it the biggest non-nuclear bomb, or the deadliest non-nuclear bomb. They, in my view, used it to test it, and which is wrong. They cannot use a bomb against a country that they call ally. And it didn't help because within a few weeks, Daesh was expanding and they took the mountains of Tora Bora. So obviously, even if that was the purpose, even if they genuinely wanted to destroy Daesh, it didn't help. Therefore, the military action, bombs, detonating bombs, arresting people, creating prisons, interfering in our country, in our democracy, in our way of life, will not help them advance any cause of theirs. They better not send more troops. They better sit down with the Afghan people for a new compact on the manner of their prisons, on the conduct of their prisons, and they better also very much sit down with the global powers and the countries in the region to recreate an environment of cooperation rather than one of confrontation, which is what we have now, unfortunately. I mean, Russia, China, Iran, even Pakistan. The Americans should sit down with and have a cooperative environment rather than one of competition, and especially where they use Afghanistan as the ground for that competition. That is hurtful to us, and we don't want it.
The great game.
The return of great game, in a way, yes.
When I read your comments on Daesh and America, where you said that you make no distinction between Daesh and America, I thought you were misquoted. That was the Voice of America in April.
I wasn't misquoted, no. That's what I felt.
Can you genuinely tell me, morally, in terms of intention, in terms of the very kind of organizational structure and chain of command and how attacks happen, how politics plays out, can you genuinely tell me there's no difference between Daesh and America?
Extremism, including Daesh, some increased under the US presence in Afghanistan, during the US presence in Afghanistan, some were created in Afghanistan, in the US presence, during the US presence. Daesh was created there. When it arrived, it brutally went into villages, killed people, hurt our identity, tried to destroy our identity, drove people away from their homes. They committed unbelievable atrocity against the Afghan people. The US was there. Daesh emerged first in Nangarhar, in Shinwar district of Nangarhar. The United States has a huge base in Jalalabad, in the central provincial capital of Nangarhar. They kept watching it, while the Afghan people kept coming to us and complaining of how Daesh was behaving and doing things.
So they knew, but they did nothing?
They not only knew, they watched.
At what point does watching become supporting?
And from the very beginning, when you are there with the intention to fight it. But then a deadly terroristic organization like that emerges, and you watch it and do nothing. In addition to that, more than that, people reported that helicopters were coming and dropping supplies. And
to
bringing
Daesh.
To those groups emerging there, yes. So it's the Afghan people that saw all that activity, neglect and support both.
So Americans dropped supplies to Daesh?
They didn't say the Americans supplied to Daesh. They said helicopters came. Now,
who do you think
now that's the question.
had those helicopters?
That's the question. Our airspace is in American hands. They have the radar, they have the airplanes, they have the entire airspace. We don't own our airspace. The Americans own the airspace. So if helicopters were coming, I'm sure the American radar saw whose helicopters, from where they came. And if they allowed those, if they were non-NATO, non-American helicopters, it belonged to someone. How come the US allowed it? And if they didn't stop it, that means they allowed it and they supported it. So they cannot tell the Afghan people that they didn't know. The airspace is in their hands, the communication is in their hands, the area is under their complete, absolute surveillance. There is no way that they can excuse themselves or offer excuses in this regard. No, we don't believe it, and they are to blame.
To an American who would watch this and say, we sacrificed thousands of our soldiers
Sorry for
to
that.
defend Afghanistan,
Yes.
and to bring about a semblance of democracy to this shaky country. We helped bring you, Mr. Karzai, to the presidency, and now you're saying we're just like ISIS. How dare you?
Yes, well, I dare very much, because I'm right. They came, they supported us, we welcomed them. A doctor comes to you and says, I want to treat you. And then he gives you the wrong medicine. Do you continue with him? You don't. He gives you the wrong treatment, or he hurts you further. You don't. We are grateful to the American people for their taxpayers' money. They are great people. They have helped Afghanistan in many ways. We are very, very grateful. We commiserate with the American families who have lost their children, their young men and women, very much. They're not to blame. They've sacrificed. It is the American government and their policy that I stand against. Not the American people, not their help to Afghanistan where it has been effective. We're grateful for that. It's the US government and their policies in Afghanistan that are counterproductive. Democracy was our own doing, not the American doing. We went and voted them. The Afghan people wanted it. The US government interfered in our democracy. Look at the mess we have today.
Was there a moment for you when it changed? You were an ally.
Yes.
And then you're not now.
There was a moment. There was a moment when they began to cause civilian casualties, and when they ignored the sanctuaries beyond Afghanistan in our neighbors in Pakistan. And we kept telling them repeatedly that there are sanctuaries, that they are being trained and sent against us. They ignored it. And they kept bombing the Afghan people, causing civilian casualties, massive civilian casualties to our people. Initially, I would very respectfully, behind closed doors, tell them that that's wrong. Don't do that. Don't ignore the sanctuaries in Pakistan and stop killing our people. They would just not listen to us. They would consider as if we didn't matter as a nation, as a people. After a year of quietly telling them to change their behavior, to change their politics, to change their policies in Afghanistan, then I had to start publicly to speak and to criticize them and to go against them. And that was in 2005. By July of 2006, I had publicly started speaking and complaining against what they did. Not that we were against the American people or that we had an ideological difference, no. But against what they were doing, the US government's policies in Afghanistan.
I asked you at the end of last year, just before the US election, Trump or Clinton, you were on the fence. Now, with half a year of which to judge Donald Trump, are you a fan or not?
Well, I'm not a fan of anybody. A year ago when you asked me, I did not want to interfere in US elections. I did not want to do in America what the American government did in Afghanistan, interfering in our elections. It's the choice of the American people. President Trump is now the US president. I wish him the best in serving America and also in doing the right thing in Afghanistan and elsewhere.
Pakistan, May 31st, massive bomb in Kabul, huge. I mean, I think the final death toll was more than 150, if I'm not mistaken.
Sad.
At least 400 injured. Horrendous attack on the people of Afghanistan. The Afghan Interior Ministry very quickly said this was the work of the Haqqani network, sponsored by Pakistan's ISI. Basically saying Pakistan did this to us. Do you believe that?
I'm in no position to immediately say, yes, it is true, or no, it isn't. We have bombs in Afghanistan. We've had a lot of terrorist activity conducted from the Pakistani territory against us, no doubt. We've had a lot of violence committed against us in Afghanistan by terrorist groups who were raised in Pakistan, trained in Pakistan, sent to Afghanistan. Tremendous atrocity has been done from that territory against the Afghan people and from those institutions in Pakistan against the Afghan people. The Pakistani people are the closest to the Afghan people of all people.
But is their government supporting terrorism against them?
They've helped us tremendously. But I also know that everything that happens in Afghanistan is not done by Pakistan. There's a lot of violence committed from Pakistani territory against Afghanistan, but not every violence, not all the violence. On this bomb, I don't know.
But in general, is Pakistan supporting terrorism?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Supporting extremism, supporting terrorism, it has been a tool in their hands for a long time, and it's been a tool together with the Americans for a long time in their hands. They've been bedfellows in the support of extremism and violence, right from the time of our struggle against the Soviets to today.
So we talk of these bombs. We talk of a lack of stability even in the so-called green zone of Kabul. Daesh with a presence in the country.
That's what's wrong. That's what's seriously wrong. From a country that became totally peaceful,
right,
where every Afghan began to work hard for a better life, a new life in Afghanistan, where the Afghan people all got together and united and went to parliaments and went to elections and did all the right things, to where we are now talking of green zones. Green zone means protect some,
right,
leave the rest to bombs.
And even those aren't protected.
Well, I'm talking of the intention here.
Right, certainly.
To protect some, well, that's wrong.
Of course it's wrong.
It's criminal.
Of course.
It's criminal to try to cordon off ourselves and let the rest of the country to do bombs and violence.
It's military occupation talk, right?
Exactly.
It's wrong. So
exactly.
even, okay, so let me finish my question.
Protect the embassies,
sure,
protect the foreign bases, let the Afghans die. That's what it means.
So yeah, to finish my question, even that, it's disgusting to talk like that, right? But it's military occupation talk. It's the reality in the sense that the country is not as stable as people would have wished. Maybe it's even worse than it was, post-2001.
Yes.
So even the so-called green zones being attacked by massive bombs.
Yes.
Daesh, the Taliban controlling 60% of Helmand province. 60%.
Probably more.
Probably more. A quarter of the whole country. Is it all President Ghani's fault?
No, not at all. It's not. Well, they have their problems, they have their issues that one can raise, but I'm not going to talk about that publicly.
Why not?
Well, I'm the former president of the country. My job is to do all to secure and to do better and to bring stability to Afghanistan. Talking about our government in public or on an international channel doesn't serve that purpose, so I wouldn't do that. But it is not entirely the fault of the Afghan government. Yeah, we have issues there as well. It's the entire circumstances of the country. It's the way the US has behaved, it's the way the neighbors have behaved, it's the way Pakistan has behaved, it's the way the US worked towards issues of their interest that caused the suspicion of our neighbors. It's the lack of, in short, when the US came initially, Afghanistan became a place of cooperation between the Afghans and the Americans, and between the Afghans and the Americans and our neighbors and the global powers. That isn't there anymore. That environment of cooperation has broken down. Suspicion has arrived. Suspicion by the Russians of the American activity in Afghanistan, on which the Russians are right. I very much understand their point of view and I agree with them. By the Chinese, I agree with them. By the Iranians, our neighbors, I agree with them. So the United States must go back to getting the trust and confidence of our neighbors and of major powers in Afghanistan, where they are assured that Afghanistan is not used as a platform against them. Right now, nobody is sure of that. And also to the Afghan people, that Afghanistan is not used so violently at the cost of the Afghan people advancing America's agenda in the global, power game.
Sir, do you believe that the United States interfered to get Ashraf Ghani elected as president?
Well, the U.S. interfered in the election. The U.S. interfered in 2009 in elections when I was a candidate. They then too blamed our election of being fraudulent, and through doing that, using their media, the BBC, the CNN, and all of that, and their newspapers.
But you won that time, so.
Yes, but I won in spite of them trying to force me to agree to the office of the chief executive, in spite of them trying to weaken my win, because I did not agree to what they were asking me to do. So they did all of that. They did exactly the same thing in 2014. So 2014 is the repetition of 2009. In 2009, they failed to achieve what they wanted. In 2014, they got what they wanted. That's as far as I can talk about the elections.
My final question to you. You support talks with the Taliban.
Absolutely.
Because you consider them sons of the soil,
Absolutely.
your words, right?
Absolutely.
And Daesh are not sons of the soil.
Not at all, not at all, yes.
But when we look at the example of other sons of the soil, and even when we see, for example, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar's group, you know, there's a kind of peace process. He committed crimes in the past. He comes back into the fold. A spirit of amnesty, brotherhood, forgiveness. But even then, with all of that, his Hizb Islami fighters still don't want to give up their weapons. Isn't that an example of what might happen? A small example.
They should give up their weapons. Mr. Hekmatyar is welcome to Afghanistan together with his colleagues. Welcome to participate in strengthening peace in Afghanistan and bringing total peace to Afghanistan and in democratic politics of the country. They have all the rights as all other citizens of Afghanistan. But that cannot be done with guns. They must give up their guns if they still have any guns with them. Everybody should do that. The guns should be only held by the Afghan police and the Afghan army. One for the protection of the country, the army, the other for law and order in the country. So that is clearly the rule, and that should happen.
If they don't want to give up their guns, what's the likelihood of the Taliban giving up their guns?
Everybody should. If they are Afghans, if they have Afghan interest in mind, they should. Holding a gun is working for someone else. They shouldn't.
Hamid Karzai, pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Good to talk to you. Good to talk to you. Lovely, lovely. Good conversation.
Welcome back to the Newsmakers. Imagine an entire city having electricity for just a few hours a day. It means no refrigeration, no medical equipment, and very little contact with the outside world. That's now the situation in the Gaza Strip after Israel slashed their power supply last week. Hundreds of Palestinians are protesting the new measures, but they're not angry at Israel. The power cuts were requested by the Palestinian Authority, the administration in the West Bank, run by political party Fatah. Is the rivalry between them and Hamas getting out of hand? And what is being done to end a looming humanitarian crisis? Randolph Nogel explains.
It was a rare flare-up of anger against Hamas. The protests in January came as a surprise. The joint reflex of a people worn down by years of pressure. Hamas were by no means the only ones to blame. But after 10 years in power, people's patience with those administering their besieged land had worn thin. The final straw was the lack of access to electricity. 4 hours a day just isn't enough.
منذ 10 سنوات تقريبا واحنا بنعاني من مشكلة الكهرباء. مشكلة عويصة جدا ممكن يتأثر علينا يعني بصير بعد آخر النهار نقفل نسكر خلص ليش فيش كهرباء. نضطر إنه نجيب إيش شغلات بديلة لكن بتجهدنا بدها مصاريف تانية مش قادرين عليها.
But the protests were seized upon by Hamas's rival in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas made his move. Abbas first slashed the salaries of tens of thousands of former Palestinian Authority employees in Gaza, who had continued to receive payments. Next, he cut off funds going to Hamas-affiliated prisoners in Israel. And then, he announced his West Bank government would no longer foot the bill for the electricity Hamas imports from Israel. A 40% reduction, meaning that Gaza's 2 million people will now lose as much as one additional precious hour of power.
في شيء أول شيء في شيء بيأثر علينا إحنا الفلسطينيين اللي صح انه ضياق وقطعان رزق، يعني كل شغلنا بالكهرباء وشيء زي، بس فيها كثير شيء بديل وتأقلمنا على الاشي هذا. طبعا والله صعبة، صار يعني اللي يولع شمعة وينسى تحرق داره.
By night, many of Gaza's streets are lit only by headlights and the occasional small fire. In some cases, it's not just a matter of discomfort, but life and death. Dr. Ayman Eid al-Sabahani is a busy man. He's one of those on the front lines of Gaza's health crisis. It's not just a shortage of supplies that make his job difficult.
في حال لا سمح الله تعطل هذه المولدات الكبيرة ستؤثر وتفاقم معاناة المرضى بالأخص الأقسام الحساسة.
To make matters worse, Gaza's only power plant, which had supplied just over 20% of the Strip's power needs, shut down in April. It ran out of fuel. The Palestinian Authority got rid of the tax exemption on diesel, doubling the price as a result. The plant partially reopened last week after Egypt made an emergency fuel delivery. And while politicians within the ranks of the Palestinian rival governments stick to playing the blame game, the people of Gaza can only hope for a brighter future. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss the electricity crisis and more, I'm joined from Ramallah by Abdullah Abdullah. He's a high-ranking member of the Palestinian Legislative Council under the Palestinian Authority of Mahmoud Abbas. And from Gaza, we're joined by Hamas's Deputy Foreign Minister, Ghazi Hamid. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure having both of you on the program. Abdullah, if I can start with you, sir. Terrible situation for the people of Gaza right now. They're getting less than 4 hours of electricity every day. Who is to blame for that crisis?
The one who is in charge. If you are in charge of any responsibility, then you have to be responsible for every need the people under your authority need. There is an offer that has been after 10 years of this terrible schism in the Palestinian society and the Palestinian political system, and then 10 years is more than enough. The people have been suffering not only today, not only yesterday, but for the past 10 years. We always put the blame on the occupation, which is true. The occupation is first responsible for this, and this is their design. In fact, they wanted to frustrate the people, and they wanted to keep the Palestinian territory divided so they can claim there is no one responsible authority for the Palestinian people to talk to. That's one. But then those who are in charge, who are insisting on staying on charge at the expense and the suffering of the people. Okay. What is their role in trying to reduce this suffering?
Let's ask a member of those in charge of Gaza. Ghazi Hamid, Abdullah says, you're in charge, you broke it, it's your fault.
It's not like the same. I think that he should understand that it's not on the base white or black, that Gaza is totally separated from the Palestinian Authority. I think there is many connections between that the Palestinian Authority is still working in Gaza. We have ministers are still working in Gaza. They have in the medical situation, in the health, in water. I think even some ministers coming from Gaza to the West Bank. So I think he should not say now there is no government. Hamas is not the government in Gaza. Now the only government is recognized is the consensus government, which was formed in 2014. It's still responsible for Gaza, but they are not acting in Gaza. So I think we should blame the consensus government, which is not acting in Gaza. Now I think that the crisis became more deeper, more critical when the President Abbas started to take some action against Gaza. He asked Israel now to stop supplying Gaza with 120 megawatt, which is the only supply for the people now in Gaza here. Okay. I think this makes the situation more critical and more catastrophic.
Let's take that and pose it to Abdullah. Why did President Abbas ask Israel to reduce electricity to Gaza at a time when the people of Gaza were suffering and only getting 4 hours a day? Why is the president trying to rub their faces in the dirt and hurt them even more?
That's not correct.
Tell me why.
President Abbas did not ask the Israelis to cut electricity from Gaza. President Abbas told the Israelis that the Palestinian National Authority will not be responsible for paying the bills of the electricity supply to Gaza, because those who are using electricity, they collect the bills, but they don't send the remittances back to the central authority. This is why he said then, from now on, we're not going to be responsible. And if they say that the Palestinian government is in charge in Gaza, that's not true on two accounts. Number one, twice the Palestinian government went to Gaza. They were not allowed to leave the hotels they were staying in. They were not allowed even to talk or to meet with the people who are working in their ministry.
Okay, so fair enough. That's because of a political divide. But hold on, that's because of a political divide, right? But when I spoke to civil servants when I was in Gaza,
then
they get paid.
Why they formed?
They get paid by Ramallah. They don't get paid. Okay, but they get paid by Ramallah. They were getting 50% of their salary from Ramallah, from the Palestinian Authority. So clearly, the money was coming to civil servants from the PA, so it showed that they were in charge, sir.
This is, you mean they should sever all remittances that paid to these civil servants? No, that's not the case. The case is that the authority to be responsible, the government to be responsible, it means that the ministers come to their ministries, they are giving orders to their ministries and following the plans for their ministries, but not to create administrative committees that are in charge of these ministries, and the real ministers in the national conciliatory government have no authority whatsoever on their own ministries.
Okay, let me ask Ghazi Hamid. Okay,
we have to be careful of what we present to the people.
And you've made the point, Ghazi Hamid. The authority in control of Gaza, which is Hamas, and I know you differ in terms of the technical terms, but Hamas controls Gaza, and Gaza owes the Palestinian Finance Ministry millions of dollars of money, right? You haven't paid the bills. And that's why Abdullah is saying, Mahmoud Abbas is saying, you haven't paid the bill, we're not going to bail you out anymore. Do you accept that Hamas and Gaza owes money to the Palestinian Finance Ministry?
Look, first of all, I said now there is no government in Gaza. Hamas is not a government. Hamas, because the absence, because of the political vacuum, because the government is not acting, Hamas is obligated now to take its actions. And we declare many times, if the government want to come back to Gaza, it's open for them. No one stopped them. Now in Gaza, we have 3 ministers. They are working freely. No one stopped them. They are moving between Gaza and the West Bank. So I think there is no any allegation that Hamas hindering the actions and the activities of the ministers of the government to work in Gaza. Second point, I think you can ask Mr. Abdullah much of money that is gathered by the government from the taxes. If I can make comparison between the revenue and the expenditures of the which is done for Gaza, there is big gap. Now the Palestinian Authority, every month they gather more than $119 million from Gaza. They just pay about $84 million for Gaza. 66% of them just for the salaries for people who are sitting at home. They just pay for Gaza about 30%. Right. But they collect a lot of money. They collect the money from the commercial from Gaza here, but they don't pay for the services for Gaza. This is the big question now. Hamas now the government here, or the people, or the de facto authority, you can call it as what's its name. They collect the money from people for the electricity, and we said frankly we are ready to convey this, to transfer this to the central authority in Ramallah. Right. But we ask the Palestinian authority in Ramallah now to sell fuel for the power plant for Gaza without taxes. This is the problem, that you want to sell the fuel for Gaza with 100% of the blue taxes, and this is very expensive for us. So it is over our capacity.
Abdullah, are you charging them high taxes and that's why they can't pay?
Listen, we can argue. I know Dr. Ghazi Hamid knows better than that, and I follow what he writes and follow what he says. But there is a very simple proposal submitted more than 2 months ago. In fact, on the latter days of April of this year. It is very simple. Hamas formed administrative committees, which is a government in practice. Hamas passes laws which is against, it cannot. It shouldn't, it's not a government to pass laws. It's not a government to build, whatever you call it. Whatever, when it passes laws, it means it's a government.
We are ready to cancel it.
Listen,
I think I declare we are ready to cancel it.
Let me finish, please. Let me finish, please. The proposal was in 3 points, simple points. You cancel the administrative committees, number 1. Number 2, you allow the conciliatory government to work, takes its responsibility fully in Gaza, and it will be responsible for every need of the people in Gaza. Third, we agree go for elections. We agree. Whatever. Listen, where is it? We asked, because we know from past experience, you say something in orally, but then in practice, you do differently.
So you don't trust each other,
President
and that's fair enough.
Asked,
hold on.
Let me
finish your point, Abdullah.
My idea, please.
We officially,
before I wrap,
officially, we agree for this publicly.
1 second.
And also we sent different messages to the President Abbas. We have no problem now to cancel and to dissolve the administrative
Dr. Hamid, give Dr. Abdullah a second.
For the government to come back. We have no problem.
Abdullah,
we have no problem for this.
Listen.
Yes.
Let me finish what I was saying.
Yes.
I said these are 3 points. Please answer in writing that you are accepting these 3 points. In fact, there was a larger delegation from Fatah Central Committee to come to Gaza to follow if we receive this written acceptance of Hamas.
And that's what you want.
Until this very moment, nothing has come.
Okay, and there's no trust, there's no reconciliation. Fair enough. Hold on, gentlemen, I've got to jump in. I've got to jump in because I've got to wrap. Dr. Hamid, I'm sorry. Ghazi Hamid, very briefly, 15 seconds, please. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Let's meet Abdullah. I was in the meeting. I was in the meeting between Hamas and Fatah with Mr. Rawhi Fattouh, Mr. Abmair Hillis. They are members of the Central Committee of Fatah. We told them frankly, I have the minute now on my computer, and we told them frankly, we have no problem for 2 points or 3 points. First of all, the government, they can come today or tomorrow to Gaza and to take all the responsibilities, including the crossings, including the security and everything. Second point, we told them we are ready immediately to cancel the administrative committee, and we told him the third point that we accept the Qatari document. And we expected from the President Abbas now to take more action in this issue.
Okay, so you're both waiting.
We did not receive anything from them.
Okay, good.
We have no problem.
Okay, so this is encouraging. It's encouraging in a way that you both say there's goodwill. You're both waiting for the other side to make a move. For the moment, Gazans are still suffering as a result of many things. The siege and the blockade, clearly, first and foremost. But the political schism between Hamas and Fatah is up there. I'm sorry, sir. I've got to wrap. I've got to move on in the program. Gazan people are suffering at the moment. We hope there will be political reconciliation. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure talking to both of you. Thank you very much.
Dutch soldiers knew, or should have known, that the men were not only being screened for war crimes, but were in real danger of being subjected to torture or execution.
2 decades on, a court in The Hague has confirmed that the Netherlands was partly responsible for the deaths of hundreds of Muslims during the Bosnian War. Around 300 people tried to seek refuge at a base run by Dutch troops working as UN peacekeepers in Srebrenica. They were fleeing Bosnian Serb troops, which eventually overran the area. But the peacekeepers expelled them, leaving them to their deaths. This latest ruling upholds an early decision that the troops could have known the refugees would be killed if they were forced to leave. The court says the Netherlands should pay just 30% of damages to victims' families, which relatives say is an injustice. Around 8,000 Muslim men and boys were killed by Bosnian Serb troops at Srebrenica. It was Europe's worst mass killing since the Second World War. Well, joining us now from The Hague is international criminal law specialist Toby Cadman. Toby, good to have you on the program. So, partial damages to be paid because the Dutch are partially responsible. Was it a fair ruling, in your opinion?
I think it was the right ruling to award compensation and to hold the Dutch soldiers liable. It is obviously disappointing that they've reduced the level of damages to 30%, based on the court's finding that that was the level of culpability. But I think it is nonetheless an important ruling and something that the lawyers for the mothers of Srebrenica that have been pursuing for a number of years. So, and of course it will have far-reaching consequences outside of Srebrenica as well for UN peacekeeping missions.
As we talk about culpability, something that immediately stands out is in the judgment, the judge saying that there was a 70% chance, based on her assessment and her team's assessment, that those men and boys would still have died had they been given safe refuge amongst the Dutch peacekeepers, and therefore the Dutch only pay 30%. How is there a legal mechanism to sort of determine that 70-30? Because when you first read it, it sounds like a bit of a thumbsuck. Is that me just being completely legally illiterate?
No, not at all. I mean, it's an entirely superficial assessment, because you can't possibly make such a determination that these men and boys would have been killed. They were under the protection of the UN. There was a decision to provide a safe haven to Muslim men and boys in the Srebrenica area. So to say that 70% likelihood of them dying anyway, it's a fairly superficial assessment to make.
President of Mothers of Srebrenica, Munira Subasic, says the verdict is shameful. We will not accept it. She's called it a great injustice, and that the Dutch state should take its responsibility for our victims, because they could have kept them all safe on the Dutch Bat compound. So she's not happy. Many, friends and families of victims aren't happy. What sort of legal avenues do you think are left? What avenues remain for them, given that the court has ruled now, and many people would say, hey, it's done and dusted. We know Ratko Mladic and the Serbs were responsible. The Dutch were partially responsible. We all have to heal and move on.
Well, I completely agree with Munira's dissatisfaction and the dissatisfaction of victims generally, because this is a slap in the face. The Dutch soldiers were responsible. I think, of course, it's right that the Serb soldiers are held accountable, like Ratko Mladic and also Radovan Karadzic, but also you have to take the point that they were under the protection of the UN. The UN had a duty to protect them, and they handed them over. So of course they have to be held accountable. Now, where the legal team takes this now will be a matter for consideration as to whether they take it higher, whether they take it elsewhere. But obviously it is limited to what they can do now. But when you talk about it's time to move on, it's very difficult for these groups, these individuals that have lost almost their entire families to move on. Bosnia and Herzegovina is still in a period of confrontation. It has not reconciled with the conflict of 92-95. And you can't have any real reconciliation unless you have truth and justice. You need to establish a process where these individuals have some satisfaction that they have received some form of a just verdict in a court. And I think that they're quite right to say that this is not a just verdict. It is, of course, an important step, but it doesn't go anywhere near as far as we would have hoped.
Yep, Toby Cadman, good to get your thoughts and expertise. Thanks so much for joining us.
जिस तरह की मॉब किलिंग्स हो रही हैं माइनॉरिटीज़ के ख़िलाफ़, मुसलमानों के, क्रिश्चियंस और दलितों के ख़िलाफ़, वो हमें एक्सेप्टेबल नहीं है। ये सरकार को ये चेतावनी देने के लिए यहाँ पे आए हैं कि इस तरह की हिंसा जो है वो नहीं चलेगी और पूरे देश की जनता इसके ख़िलाफ़ आवाज़ उठा रही है।
That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.